You know, we all think we know the story of who discovered America. But what if that story is missing a huge, crucial chapter? One that happened almost a full 100 years before Columbus ever set sail.
I mean, that's a pretty wild claim, right? It could totally rewrite a key moment in world history. The idea is that a Scottish nobleman, a powerful prince, made a peaceful, well-documented trip to the New World way back in the 14th century.
So, let's meet the man at the center of it all. Prince Henry Sinclair. Born in the famous Rosslyn Castle, he was a Jarl of Orkney. That's a big deal. A powerful guy with Viking blood and his own fleet. And the story goes that in 1398, he set off on an incredible expedition that history seems to have, well, completely forgotten.
All right, so let's dig into what we know about this supposed voyage of 1398. Proponents say this wasn't just some fishing trip that went off course. This was a planned, recorded, full-on expedition. According to the tale, the prep for this started years earlier. Sinclair hired these famous Venetian navigators, the Zeno brothers, to map the North Atlantic. Then boom, spring of 1398, he launches his fleet. Their goal? To find a rumored new land, rich with resources, across the ocean. And by June, they'd supposedly dropped anchor right in North America.
Now, almost this entire claim hinges on one single, really important document, the Zeno narratives. This was basically the ship's log kept by Antonio Zeno himself. It's the main, and you guessed it, the most controversial piece of written evidence we have.
And here's where the story gets really interesting. Unlike the conquest that came later, Sinclair's expedition is described as totally peaceful. The log talks about friendly, harmonious contact with the native Micmac people. The crew supposedly spent at least a year just exploring the coastline, hunting, and maybe even celebrating the very first Christmas on American soil.
Okay, so if all this really happened, where's the proof, right? I mean, besides one dusty old document, did Sinclair and his guys leave anything behind? Well, supporters of this theory point to a pretty fascinating trail of clues that are scattered across 2 entire continents. The evidence really falls into 4 big buckets. You've got the map that supposedly guided them, some physical objects they might have left behind, amazing legends from the people they met, and even some mysterious buildings and strange carvings. Let's break them down one by one.
First up, the Zeno map. This thing was made as part of the Voyages prep work, and this chart of the North Atlantic was supposedly so advanced, so accurate for its time, that it became the must-have map for sailors for over 100 years.
Now get this. In our time, researchers took this old map and compared it to modern U.S. Air Force aerial surveys, and they found dozens of identical points. So the big question is, how could a map from the 1300s be that accurate unless someone had actually been there? It's a pretty powerful point.
Okay, let's move on to the physical stuff, the things you can actually touch. A very old Venetian cannon, the exact type used in the late 1300s, was pulled up from a harbor in Nova Scotia. Then, over in Massachusetts, there's a rock carving that looks an awful lot like a medieval knight, complete with a shield. And maybe weirdest of all, back in Scotland, at Sinclair's own Rosslyn Chapel, there are stone carvings of, get this, corn and aloe cactus, plants that were absolutely unknown in Europe before Columbus. So how did they get there? But the evidence isn't just stone and steel. The oral history of the Micmac people is filled with these incredible legends of a figure named Glooskap. He was described as this wise, bearded leader who came from across the sea, taught them new things like how to fish with nets, and was just seen as this great, respected man.
And here's the part that really gives people goosebumps. Proponents point to this incredible linguistic link. If you say Jarl Sinclair, Jarl was his title, it sounds almost exactly like Glooskap. Is that just a wild coincidence? Or maybe, just maybe, it's a 600-year-old echo of a real historical meeting.
And finally, there's this weird, mysterious stone tower in Rhode Island. Nobody's 100% sure where it came from, but supporters of the Sinclair theory point out that its measurements are based on the Scottish ell, a unit of measurement that was pretty much only used in Scotland during the 14th century. They argue that this tiny detail plus its architectural style links it directly to Sinclair's time and his people. So, we've just seen a mountain of pretty compelling, even if it's circumstantial, evidence. It might seem like, okay, case closed. A hidden chapter of history has been found. But, well, it's just not that simple.
Yeah, mainstream historians are still deeply, deeply skeptical. And you know what? There are other more widely accepted stories of pre-Columbian discovery that really put the whole Sinclair voyage into a very different light.
Well, let's just put this whole thing into perspective for a second. About 400 years before Sinclair, the Norse Vikings were definitely exploring North America. We know this. Their story, told in the Icelandic sagas, is backed up by cold, hard archaeological evidence, like the Viking settlement they literally dug up at Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland. The Sinclair claim, on the other hand, is based on that one log and a lot of interpretive evidence. It remains a very controversial theory, not a confirmed fact.
And the skeptics? Oh, they have some serious questions. First, the timing is a huge red flag. Why did this story only pop up 160 years after the voyage, and why did it take almost 500 years for anyone to really champion this claim? They also point to a bunch of historical and geographical mistakes inside the Zeno narratives themselves, which makes you question if they're even real. Plus, the log never once mentions the word Orkney. Kind of weird for a trip led by the Earl of Orkney, right? And finally, the prince in the log is called Zixny, and it's totally possible that wasn't Sinclair at all.
Look, the idea of Europeans being in America before Columbus isn't radical. It's a fact. It's established history. The Norse were here. The real debate is just, was Prince Henry Sinclair here too? So that brings us to the biggest question of all. If this voyage actually happened, why on earth did it just vanish from the history books? Why was it so completely overshadowed by Columbus a century later?
Well, supporters point to just an incredible string of bad luck. Soon after he got home, Prince Henry was assassinated. His navigator, Antonio Zeno, also died. And that all-important ship's log, the Zeno narratives, it was just tossed in an attic somewhere, totally forgotten for over 160 years. And to top it all off, Sinclair's own son and heir was captured and thrown in prison, so he couldn't follow up on his dad's incredible discovery.
And this quote from a proponent just nails it. 100 years after Sinclair, Columbus had the brand new printing press to spread his story all over Europe. Sinclair had, well, nothing. No media, no PR team, just a series of tragedies that basically buried his amazing achievement.
And yet, the story lives on. It's inspired books, movies, and some really passionate researchers. In 1998, for the 600th anniversary of the voyage, people held celebrations all the way from Nova Scotia to New Hampshire. It just proves how powerful and captivating this saga really is.
So, where does all this leave us? Is this a case of a true pioneer whose story was just lost to a cruel twist of fate? Or is it a brilliant piece of historical fiction, a legend built on amazing coincidences and a little bit of wishful thinking? The evidence is there, the doubts are real, and the story? Well, the story just keeps on going.